It was 5,000 years since her people were forced into the seas by the resource scarcity that plagued her kingdom when their time was old and fragile. They were once a great dynasty that spanned the Apelgagio and the neighboring lands. It was called Mutwa and was once prosperous. Then disaster struck like a thief in the night. Pestilence, disease both viral and agricultural. They tried to revive them but spectacularly failed. It was on the third year when they found minerals and other resources they can use to survive, but there was one problem: location. It was abundant in plants and sea life for food. They were caves with pockets. Marine life, both prey and predator species, used lava vents for warmth and light, but it was all 1,000 kilometers under sea level. They only could have found it because despite the era, the Man-U people were beyond their time in engineering, science and infrastructure. In a last-ditch effort, the royal family and the commoners pooled what they could and made several adjustable structures, small and big. With a small team of volunteers, created a city to live. It took them a year, but they successfully created a small village. Everyone was overjoyed. There were parties, celebrations, all citizens rich and poor joined and mingled, no longer separated by the caste system. They continued until they created an underground kingdom. The one who led this venture and they honored by naming the new kingdom after were none other than their Princess Alicia de Mar. The newly formed kingdom was hence formed name Alicia Mar Mut, a combination of her name and the name of their current kingdom they will be leaving behind, so their descendants will remember where they came from. As the years went by, the Mutwa people adapt to their environment until they mutated and created mermaid-like features from their stories. Now they realized that mer people were once human who adapted to their underwater environment. 10 kilometers away located the Kingdom of Lore, a human kingdom, ruled by King Christian and Queen Elizabeth. They were wise beyond their years, but even they couldn't see the danger which would soon befell the prince. Prince Hia de Domain, named after his grandfather, the Prince of Spain, he was born into royalty and loved in duty. Even his parents couldn't persuade their own son into resting. Princess Kaiko swam along the ocean's reefs with her dolphin friend Mala and crab friend Sonia. She had just finished a diplomatic meeting with the Duke of the Narima Trench and the Samria Trench for trading goods. Her kingdom would provide food and clothing for the Narima's sea cucumbers and the Samria's snail fish. Sea cucumbers and snailfish, when prepared in the style her kingdom cooks uses, are delicious and are rare delicacies which only a few are able to eat because they can't find them in their kingdom. Mala loves anything sweet, so whenever they meet, Calco would make desserts herself for Mala, and for Sonia, Calco would bring all the latest gossips for her. Calco is a princess, a diplomat, a 5-star chef and a great friend. In the other side, Prince Hia have only one friend, his closest aide, Keith. Keith's job is to translate the prince's words to people who don't understand, correct any misunderstanding when he is being curt, and to make sure Prince Hia doesn't hold up in his figurative shell all day. Chapter: When Fire Meets Ice. The shimmer of dawn barely touched the surface that morning, and far beneath it, the golden-pink glow of the Alicia Mar Mut Palace glimmered like a living sun. Princess Kaiko, known among her friends as Kalki, swam through the coral passageways, her sunset and Milky Way tail leaving trails of iridescent light behind her. The royal colors of her scales, rose gold blending into cosmic violet, were said to be rarer than pearls born under lightning storms. She had done her duty well, every treaty sealed, every trade route negotiated, every neighboring trench now bound in peace. And yet, something tugged at her heart. The time of the soul current had come. Every 18 years, each citizen of Alicia Mar Mut was guided by the soul current, a mystical energy that thrummed in their hearts, to find the one who shared their soul's rhythm. For some, that person was within their kingdom; for others, it took years of searching. Kalki's current had pulled her everywhere, the coral plains, the lava vent valleys, even to the dark reaches where light died. And still, she had not found him. Her dolphin friend Mala teased, "Maybe your soulmate is hiding behind the clouds, princess." Sonia the crab added slyly, "Yes, maybe he's above the waves. You've charmed every creature below them." Kalki laughed, her eyes bright like twin drops of sunlight. "Then above the waves I'll go. Who knows, perhaps fate enjoys a bit of irony." The transformation. At the edge of the Mariana Abyss, ancient statues of their ancestors stood guard over a glowing coral altar. As she swam closer, the bioluminescent runes pulsed to life. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, "Remember, my daughter, our ancestors were once human. The sea changed us, and it can change us again." Kalki placed her hand over the altar crystal, whispering the ancestral incantation. Light surged around her, wrapping her in warmth and pain. Her tail split into two shimmering streams of gold and violet, reforming as legs, fragile, unsteady, yet strong. The first breath of air filled her lungs like a song she'd long forgotten. She stumbled onto the shore, barefoot, curious, wearing a shimmering gown woven from sea silk that glowed faintly under the moonlight. The encounter. The world above was louder, harsher, and more chaotic than the serenity of the deep. Kalki wandered through the docks of a coastal town, wide-eyed at the lights, the strange metal beasts with wheels, and the sound of laughter mixed with shouting. Her naivety made her easy prey. A group of slave traders, rough men with nets and cruel eyes, spotted her. Her beauty was unnatural to them, her hair, like liquid copper streaked with starlight, her movements fluid as if she still danced through waves. "Look at this one," one sneered. "She'll fetch a good price." Kalki tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "Please, I'm just lost." They advanced. Panic fluttered in her chest. She turned to run, but the docks were narrow. Her sea silk gown snagged. A hand reached out, grabbing her wrist. She spun, only to see a figure cloaked in midnight blue, standing between her and the traders. The moonlight caught on the stranger's silver hair and ice-blue eyes, cold, commanding, and yet, beneath that frost, something flickered, concern. "Let her go," his voice cut through the night like a blade of winter. The men laughed. "You think you can order us, pretty boy?" The young man didn't answer. He simply drew his sword, one motion, clean and silent. The next second, the men's nets fell to the ground, sliced clean in half. The traders fled. The girl, still trembling, stared at him. "Are you hurt?" he asked curtly, his tone distant, professional. Kalki blinked. "No, you saved me." He sighed, as if saving people was an inconvenience. "You shouldn't be out here alone. This port isn't safe." But as he turned to leave, something made him stop. Her voice, gentle, melodic, unlike any he'd ever heard. "Wait, who are you?" He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, "Prince Hia de Domain. But most call me," he grimaced slightly, "the Ice Lord." Her lips parted in awe. "Ice Lord? But, you don't seem cold." He blinked, caught off guard for the first time in years. "You don't know me, clearly." "I don't have to," she said softly. "I can feel it. You're not cold, you're lonely." For a moment, his walls cracked. Then he looked at her fully, and his breath caught. Her eyes, swirling gold and violet, seemed to pull him in, as though the sea itself looked through them. Something inside him stirred. The same moment, deep in her chest, the soul current surged, stronger than it ever had. Kalki gasped softly, her hand over her heart. He felt it too, a pulse, faint but undeniable, like two tides meeting after millennia apart. Their fate begins. He offered his cloak when he saw her shiver. She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Ice Lord." He shook his head, fighting the smallest of smiles. "Ren," he said finally, voice low. "Call me Ren." "Then you must call me Kalki," she replied, bright and teasing. "Since you did save me, I owe you something." Ren frowned. "I need nothing from you." "But I insist," she said stubbornly, crossing her arms, a gesture he found strangely endearing. He sighed, defeated by the warmth in her tone. "Very well. Then you owe me one truth." "What truth? Who are you really?" Kalki hesitated, glancing at the waves. The sea shimmered back at her as if whispering secrets. "Let's just say," she said finally, "I come from very far. I'm trying to find Mo and Amkara. I know they are in this kingdom, but I don't know their appearance or the name they are using." He stared at her, unreadable. "You're mysterious. And you," she smiled, "are far too serious." For the first time in years, the Ice Lord laughed, quietly but real. Above them, the moon glowed silver. Beneath them, the sea whispered its approval. Neither of them knew that their meeting would shake two worlds, the world above the waves and the kingdom beneath them. For when fire meets ice, destinies melt and freeze anew. Chapter. The taste of warmth. The night air was crisp with salt and spice. Lanterns swung gently over the coastal avenue, their golden glow painting the cobblestones in soft amber. Prince Ren was carrying him to the palace. When she smelt something unknown but delicious, her eyes widened, her composure forgotten as her nose twitched at the strange and wonderful aromas. "Ren," she said softly, tugging his sleeve. "What is that smell?" He turned, eyebrow raised. "Smoke and oil. Street food. Hardly fit for a princess." "Kalko, princess, why would?" "Ren, you look like you're seeing street food for the first time. So that's why I called you princess." She frowned. "Street food?" She pointed toward a nearby vendor selling golden dumplings sizzling in a pan. "They smell happy." Ren gave her a dry look. "Happy?" Kalki nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." Kalki shouted in excitement. Ren stepped up beside her, a frown tugging at his mouth. "You shouldn't eat random food. You don't even know what's in it. She looked up at him, smiling in a way that melted every layer of his careful composure. Then you try it first, my lord. With a smirk on her face. If you don't turn into a frog, I'll know it's safe. He blinked, and then, against all logic, he laughed. A short, quiet, startled laugh. The vendor stared. So did a few nearby guards. The Ice Lord, laughing? Impossible. Resigned, Ren took one of the dumplings and bit it. The crisp shell broke with a satisfying crunch, releasing steam scented with herbs and fish. It was surprisingly good. Well? She asked, eyes sparkling. He swallowed, trying not to let his expression betray him. Edible. That means delicious, she teased, taking one for herself. She bit into it and gasped, her entire face lighting up. Oh, this tastes like coral after a storm, sweet and warm and... He shook his head, half exasperated, half enchanted. You compare food to weather? How else would you describe something wonderful? She said, licking her fingers without caring that he was watching. You humans really don't know poetry. Humans, he repeated sharply, but before he could press further, she darted away to another stall. Wait, Kalki. But she was already standing at a fruit vendor's booth, marveling at the colors. What are these? She asked, picking up a red apple. They look like rubies. Apples, he muttered, catching up. You'll give my guards a heart attack if you keep running off. She grinned mischievously. Then they should eat an apple. It's good for the heart. He exhaled, long-suffering but secretly charmed. You're insufferable, and you're fun when you stop pretending to be stone. For a moment, their eyes met, hers golden violet, warm and alive, his icy blue, unreadable but softening. The noise of the market faded around them. Just two strangers bound by something neither could name yet. They spent another hour wandering through the market. She tried roasted corn and candied nuts, sticky honey bread and sweet milk tea. Each time, she insisted Ren take the first bite, a ritual that made him grumble but never truly refuse. Each time, he found himself watching her, the way she smiled, the way her laughter bubbled like sunlight underwater. When they finally left, the moon hung high, silvering the path to the palace. Kalki walked beside him quietly, the night's joy fading into a comfortable silence. At the palace gates, she stopped, turning to him. Thank you, for letting me taste your world, she said softly. I didn't think the surface could be so alive. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. And I didn't think anyone could make the surface feel warm again. She smiled faintly. See? Not friends yet, but not strangers either. He nodded once, eyes lingering a heartbeat too long. No, something else. As the guards opened the great gates and the light of the palace enveloped them, neither realized that they had already begun to change each other. The girl of the sea teaching warmth to the ice prince, and the cold prince teacher the warm princess the way of the surface. Chapter. The Palace of Ice and Secrets. The Palace of Lore rose from the cliffs like a crown of marble and crystal. Moonlight shimmered on its spires, and every tower seemed carved from frost. Within its hallowed corridors, gleamed with glass mosaics and chandeliers shaped like falling snowflakes, elegant but cold. Kalki stepped inside the sea still clinging to her scent, salt, sunlight, and coral bloom. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished floor, and her eyes darted from one shining surface to another in wonder. Ren walked beside her, silent as always, his cloak brushing against her arm. The guards at the entrance bowed low. Your Highness, one began carefully, you were expected hours ago. The council. Tell the council the session is postponed, Ren interrupted curtly. I have a guest. The guard hesitated, eyeing the barefoot girl wrapped in a sea-colored cloak. A guest, Your Highness? Ren's tone sharpened. Do you need me to repeat myself? The guard blanched. And no, sire. He hurried off. Kalki blinked up at Ren. You didn't have to frighten him. He asked too many questions, he said simply. That's called curiosity. Where I come from, it's called insolence. She smiled softly, shaking her head. You must live in a very serious world. He almost replied, but her tone was too gentle to argue with. The hidden guest. Ren led her through the palace's west wing, past tall portraits of ancestors in armor and velvet, their painted eyes following silently. The further they walked, the colder the air became. Kalki shivered. You live in a palace made of winter, she murmured, breath misting. He glanced at her. It suits me. It suits someone who doesn't want anyone too close, she said without thinking. He paused mid-step. You're unusually perceptive. Or maybe, she said, smiling faintly, I've just seen too many lonely hearts trying to hide. Ren said nothing, but his jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something more fragile. Finally, he opened a door to a smaller chamber, warm, quiet, with a fireplace flickering low. "You'll stay here for the night," he said. "I'll arrange clothes and food. Don't leave this room until I say. Am I your prisoner?" His brow furrowed. "My guest. But the court doesn't welcome strangers easily. Until I know what to tell them, it's safer this way." Kalki tilted her head, studying him. "You're protecting me, then?" "Don't misunderstand," he said, turning to go. "I'm protecting myself from the questions." But his hand lingered on the door handle for just a heartbeat longer than it should have. The Garden of Ice. The next morning, Ren was awakened by a commotion in the west courtyard. Servants were whispering, running toward the glass gardens, the one place in the palace where flowers had not bloomed for years. He followed the sound, and froze. Kalki stood in the center of the courtyard, barefoot once again, sunlight streaming through the glass roof. The once dead vines were now crawling up marble pillars, blooming in impossible colors, coral reds, ocean blues, petals glimmering like pearls. A small pool nearby shimmered as fish swam within it, though it had been empty for years. She turned as he entered, smiling shyly. "Good morning, Ren." He stared, speechless. What did you do?" "I just touched the roots," she said innocently. "They were sleeping. I woke them up. I have a way with plants, it runs in my family." Ren stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "No one has been able to make anything grow here. The frost killed everything long ago." "Then maybe," she said softly, "your frost was just waiting for someone warm enough to melt it." She smiled sweetly at him. Her words lingered like sunlight through snow. He looked around, the air no longer bit with chill, but shimmered with life. Birds chirped, and light played on the water. For the first time, the garden breathed. Ren turned back to her. "Who are you, really?" Red said in an inquiring but happy tone. Kalki hesitated. The sea shimmered faintly in her eyes, gold and violet. "Someone who was searching," she said. "And I think I was meant to find you." Chapter. Not friends, not yet. In the days that followed, Ren found excuses to visit her chambers, bringing reports, books, or simply to make sure she wasn't causing chaos, as he phrased it. Kalki explored the palace gardens, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in outing gowns. The maids couldn't stop gossiping about. "She looks like she stepped out of a dream," one whispered. She laughed easily, spoke kindly to the servants, and even coaxed the palace cats to follow her. Everywhere she went, warmth followed, warmth the Ice Lord pretended not to notice but quietly welcomed. He still walked with his careful distance, clipped words, and practiced frown. But sometimes, when she caught him looking, there was a question in his eyes, one he hadn't dared to ask even himself. They weren't friends, not yet, but there was something there, the fragile space between warmth and frost, where something new begins to grow. Chapter. Dreams of the Deep. The palace slept beneath a veil of moonlight. Outside, waves crashed far below the cliff walls, a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo in Ren's veins as he lay awake in his chamber. For the first time in years, he dreamt. Not of steel or duty, not of frost and power. He dreamt of the sea. He was floating, not drowning, but alive. The water shimmered with golden light, and in that light he saw her, Kaiko, her hair fanning like copper silk, her eyes reflecting constellations he couldn't name. She reached for him, smiling, whispering something he couldn't hear. When he reached back, he woke with a start. His heart pounded, his palms were wet with seawater. He stared at them, wide-eyed. "Impossible," he whispered, but as he turned toward the window, he thought, for just a moment, that he saw a reflection in the glass, her silhouette, fading into the night. The court of frost and fire. By morning, the rumors had already begun. Servants whispered about the mysterious girl who had brought life back to the garden. The royal council gathered in hushed concern. And Ren, though he commanded silence, knew curiosity in this palace was as contagious as flame. When he entered the council chamber, the air was sharp with tension. His elder brother, Prince Ruck, lounged against the marble table with a smirk that never reached his eyes. "Well, little brother," Ruck drawled, "I hear you've taken up gardening. And hosting uninvited guests." Ren met his gaze coolly. "It's called mercy. You should try it sometime." Ruck chuckled, though his hand curled tight around his goblet. "Mercy? From you? You must be unwell." Before Ren could respond, Chancellor Viren, the oldest and most political man in the room, spoke in his rasping tone. "Your Highness, we must discuss the woman. No record, no lineage, no surname. She appeared from nowhere. Some say she's an enchantress." Ren's jaw tightened. "She's a traveler. That's all. Travelers don't make frost-born vines bloom overnight," the Chancellor said sharply. Your Majesty, this girl is a threat to the order. Ren's fingers brushed the hilt of his sword, though his voice stayed calm. The only threat here is your superstition. Ruck leaned forward, eyes glinting. If she's harmless, then bring her here. Let us judge her ourselves. No, Ren said instantly, his voice like ice cracking. She's my guest. She stays under my protection. The council exchanged looks, wary, calculating. Ruck smiled thinly. Ah, so the Ice Lord melts, after all. Ren ignored him, turning on his heel and leaving the chamber, his cloak snapping behind him like a stormwind. The garden and the dreamer. Kalki was sitting in the restored garden when he found her, surrounded by butterflies and blooming lilies that shouldn't exist in this climate. She was humming softly, a tune that seemed both ancient and tender, one the sea itself might have sung. Ren watched from the shadows for a moment, the melody stirring something deep within him, that same strange warmth that haunted his dreams.